Paolo, how are you?
Fine, thank you very much, Larry. Nice to catch up with you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce to you my third podcast guest, Paolo Lencioni. I met Paolo and many years ago back in South Africa, I think through Dr. John Sheridan, the late Dr. John Sheridan. I was fascinated, Paolo, first of all, that you were South African, you'd gone to the UK, and both you and Anne were vets and then became accountants. And then I met up with you again through Profit Diagnostics. I went to Australia and I attended one of your workshops that blew my mind because in that you almost hinted that you could look at the financials of a practice and almost see that the business was sick, much like you read a blood profile. I know you're passionate about veterinary software. I'm currently using Neo, your old program, sold to IDEX here in New Zealand. So it's just crazy how the dots line up. But one thing about you and you've been consistently passionate about helping the vet profession. Something that's really, really important to me. So I would regard you, and I'm not blowing smoke up your bum, but you're an incredible individual, an incredible influence, and I've always just loved your passion. And I guess my first question to you, which I'd asked you briefly before, is first of all, why did you change from being a vet to becoming an accountant?
Okay, so it was actually, there's a couple of reasons there, and there's actually nothing too serious around the change. First of all, when we opened up a veterinary practice in the UK, and we realized after we'd had it for about 3 years that we really weren't capable of, like, the financial dynamics of it just wasn't something we were interested in. And historically, as veterinarians or as veterinary students, my wife Anne and I, we really just weren't interested in money. We wanted to actually be wildlife vets, which didn't play out. We ended up in the UK, then we ended up setting up and doing a startup veterinary practice, and you end up in this kind of, like, life just happens to you. And then we were like, gee, we're actually going to make some money if we want to have like a career. So just by default, like, initially I actually enrolled in a IT course and enrolled in an MBA through the here at Washington University. We said, well, we're missing business skills, we're missing IT skills, so let's just upskill. And we had to select courses we could only do by distance learning because we were running a veterinary practice at that point in time. So we did some distance learning courses in those two skills, which we quite enjoyed. And then when Anne finished her MBA, she thought, well, this is too superficial financially. It gives a good overview, but actually financially, I still don't feel astute enough. So she said, I'm going to enroll in accounting and get an accounting degree. And I was like, oh, I can't let her get ahead of me. So if she's going to be spending all weekend studying and stuff,
The good old male ego.
we may as well just do it together. So we did that whilst we owned the practice. And it was actually, interestingly, it was in the UK, but just by pure coincidence, the only decent accounting qualification we could get was an Australian one by correspondence, which was through the University of Southern Queensland. So, with no intentions or even knowing that we were eventually going to emigrate to Australia, we actually completed an Australian accounting degree whilst we were running a practice in the UK. And then the opportunity arose that one of the vets that was working for me wanted to buy the practice. And Anne and I had never really thought about, like, we'd never really considered the UK as a place we wanted to live forever. We kind of Southern Hemisphere people, we like the warmer climates. So after 11 years in the UK, we knew we had to emigrate somewhere. And we looked around and we thought Australia was the best fit for us. So we sold the practice to one of our employed vets and came over to Australia. And when we were here, we thought, well, let's try and work, let's do something different. Like, it's good for life skills in general. We've done a veterinary practice, let's work in the accounting industry for a few years. And then after having done that for a couple of years for other people, we thought, well, actually, we could do this for ourselves. uh, and so we opened up APL Accountants, which was initially our very first sort of 6 months or so. We were just going to be a general accounting firm, but then a guy called Chris Newton gave us some advice and said, look, why don't you just target vets? It's what you know and it's what you love. So we said, all right, we just shut the doors to absolutely every other business type. And all we'll do is veterinary practices and their associated businesses and their spouses businesses. So we can just do the whole family group. And that's what we've stuck with now for over 12 years.
We're very lucky to still have you. That's all I can say. So thank you for your passion and your commitment. And thank you for Chris Newton for focusing you on the vet profession.
Yeah.
I guess I've always had a sense that as a veterinary professional, I needed that business side, as you say. So you went and got the business, you went and got the IT. And I know that you're involved with a piece of software called Profit Diagnostics. So even though I remember as a young veterinarian sitting at the monthly meeting with the accountant, and he would push forward the piece of paper and line his pens up, and he would give us a beautiful set of financials effectively for the receiver of revenue.
Yeah.
At that point, I didn't even understand the difference between that set of books for the for revenue and the management accounts, and the difference in between. And so I have a sense that as a young veterinarian, are we prepared for the business side? Yes or no? Are we prepared for the people side, all the people that hit us? And do we have the emotional resilience with what's going on within the profession now? In your last webinar, you spoke about almost the post-COVID bubble, and the reality that all those problems we had within the profession are now highlighted because we have more patients, more stress, a deeper need to understand. And I guess my question is, you answered it before, veterinarians are not interested in the business side. Is it possible to learn the very basics and teach a young veterinarian or a new veterinary business owner the basics of what to look for that things are not going well, other than there's no money in the bank? Because there always seems to be cash flow, but it's all over the place.
Yeah. So I do in some extent, like one can easily, for this particular case, point the fingers at the university and say maybe they need to upskill veterinary students a bit more in financial studies. That said, if I think of myself when I was actually a veterinary student and there was an optional course offered in finance, I probably wouldn't have attended, because at that stage, you've got a pretty hard curriculum to get through. It's a pretty hard degree, and your head space is so stuck in anatomy and physiology and pharmacology and all that stuff that you just can't basically flip and think the other way. So it's hard to say that people actually want to develop that life skill whilst they're students. One of the really nice things, though, is actually just recently I've been invited to the Gatton campus to address the final year students on wage negotiations and things like that. So, and apparently the demand is quite high. So I think the newer generation of vets, the younger guys, coming in now are a little bit smarter than we were. When it comes to money, they've kind of realized that this is actually going to be a factor in how they work. Whether they have the full picture, they're looking at it really from the perspective of how am I going to do this as an employee, whether they're going to actually get the full picture of how this actually has to operate as a business, and as an employee, you can only earn enough if the business is doing well. I don't know. That'll be my challenge. I generally address business owners, not students, so it's going to be an interesting day for me. So I think the real necessity for learning this stuff becomes when you realize, a certain percentage of people are business owner material, and they decide, well, I'm actually capped as an employee. I want to go further in life. I actually want to have investments. And then they realize that they're going to have their own business. And when they get to that stage and they start running their own business, suddenly the light bulb comes on and says, okay, I actually need to make money out of this thing. Otherwise, I'm just, I may as well have stayed as an employee because I'm no really better off if I don't run it properly. And I think that's where the aha moment came for Anne and I. And I think that's kind of where the aha moment comes to some business owners. I would say 20% of business owners are very interested in that stuff, and 80% of business owners, I don't think this is veterinary specific, to be honest with you, but I think 80% of people who actually own a business actually really haven't had that realization that they are potentially sitting on a gold mine, but it's not going to happen by accident. You really need to look at the numbers and look at what you're selling and look at your team performance and things like that to actually make it really profitable.
Interesting. I guess life has potential.
Yeah.
It's what you make of it. So
and incidentally, there's always been this kind of rumor that veterinary practices are like a cottage industry. It's mom and pop stores. Veterinarians don't know how to run businesses. Veterinary practices aren't profitable. It's not true. Veterinary practices are very profitable if they run well. And as an accounting firm, we deal with some extremely high net worth individuals now who've run veterinary practices. And they've had the patience, they played the long game, they've had veterinary practices for 15 years, and they are very, very high net worth individuals now with lots of investments outside of the veterinary industry. So it's a good earner if you do it well. And to do it well, you think about the money and you think about the ethics together. The one actually, if you practice the best veterinary surgery, the best veterinary practice, the best medicine you can, and remember to charge for it, you will automatically make money. But the and remember to charge for it is the important part there. Yeah.
In your discussion with the students, I'd be really interested to hear what happens, because I think that that line between empathy and pure business doesn't give a crap about emotion. There's a result you have to produce, and in that negotiation, either as a young veterinarian asking for more money, I know you've been through in one of your webinars about the old 4 times multiple. You need to turn over 4 times what you earn, and there's a sliding scale for that.
Yeah.
And then also, once you've learned that skill and realized, gee, I really have to be of value to the business, how do you move from that and then saying no to a client when their perception is that your fees are too high? And so if you don't understand as a young veterinarian what the cost of veterinary business is, and the client has no perception because we don't really market ourselves too well as to what we do, those two things together, boom, how do you say no? And so the anxiety and stress and build up around money and empathy without boundaries leads to self-destruction, really.
It does, and this is kind of the catchy thing that I think it's very hard to understand as a veterinary student who's had sort of 5.5 to 6 years of medicine and treating patients drummed into you, to understand the dynamics about this. And it's very hard to flip your brain between that empathy and the business side. For me, so first of all, I have to say that in terms of animal care and animal ethics, Anne and I are passionate about this also, right? So those of us who know us really well know we're actually very involved in rescuing troubled dogs and then doing very daggy dog sports with them and changing them into beautiful pets and do dog dancing competitions with them. Right. So that's my wife's passion. She loves rescuing old beat up dogs. And then we turn them into acceptable pets. So we're very passionate about this. But having had the financial background, the snap point is really none of this stuff can happen unless you have the financial backing to do it. So taking the picture of a veterinary practice, and I want to offer the best veterinary care to the patients around me, you can't offer that veterinary care unless you have a CPD allowance, unless you have an ultrasound machine, unless there's an in-house blood machine, unless you have a nice staff room at the practice where you can have decent meetings and the staff can just unwind for a second, unless you can have nice staff amenities and a coffee machine in the practice where you can, just enjoy the workplace environment. All this stuff takes money. And our experience now, because I get exposed to, no word of a lie now, over 300 veterinary practices a year between my valuation work and my KPI work. The practices that are profitable and under our guidance and in our hands, and profitable and ethical, offer significantly better patient care than practices that are not profitable. And there's a very, very strong correlation between the two. In fact, I would argue to say there is not a single low profit margin veterinary practice that can actually offer optimal patient care. So you've got to get over that hump. So then we have very profitable practices now who are trying to understand how they can deal with their inflow of charity cases and wildlife cases. And I think, and Anne and I have discussed, the best way to do this is to allocate some of your profit as a budget. So say we're going to budget 1% of our profit margin, say maybe $30,000 a year for charity cases. We put it in a separate bank account, and that's the kitty we have for charity cases. And when that kitty is empty, we've done our bit. You can't expect us emotionally and financially to do any more than give away that amount of money and allocate our team and their time to fixing these cases. So that's our takeaway from doing this. If you're going to do charity work, have a budget, monitor it, and make sure you're doing the right amount. Otherwise, it just goes out of control. And you lose your profitability and your patient care goes. And your charity cases start taking up slots for your paid up clients who are really looking after their pets very well and want to look after their pets very well. So there's no easy answer to that, but that's our solution to it.
I just love your language around flipping your brain and around snap point. There's a point, it's called a boundary. And so there's a boundary with owners because they have a responsibility to look after everyone. They've got to find that charity money, that $30,000. When it's finished, it's finished. How would you language it to, let's say, someone who's not financially astute and aware, other than saying you're not going to get an increase if you don't. And that whole holding vets accountable to numbers and KPIs, and some veterinary teams and team members just back off because they think you're using them for money, basically.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, delivery to an employed vet versus a business owner would have to be very, very different. Because as an employed vet, definitely the big picture of like how the business is doing and how much money the boss is taking home is going to be of very, very little interest. So from the point of delivery to an employee, there's a very, very, very simple mantra, and I've actually already mentioned it before. Your job is to treat what's in front of you to the best of your ability and apply the best quality medicine, surgery, and whatever you've learned at university. You can do that. Your obligation legally to your employer is to charge for it. If you do those two things, then the KPIs in your hands are irrelevant. So treat everything to the best of your ability and remember to charge for it. That's it. That's all you have to do. So if you're then where the prices are set for the veterinary practice. In other words, if the prices are too low for the veterinary practice and the said employee cannot generate enough revenue, well, then that's management's job to increase prices. Okay. You cannot go back though and say, I think the prices are too high for this practice, because as an employee, you don't really make that decision. You're there to treat everything that's in front of you, and you're obliged to charge for it. That's basically it. If there's not enough customers coming in through the door, most of the responsibility of that is management's responsibility. They're responsible for the visibility of the practice, the online marketing of the practice, all that stuff. Again, your only obligation to clients returning is how well you treat them in the consult room and what your bedside manner is. So part of that, ethical obligation to you is to treat people in the consult room in a courteous manner that they actually like it. You explain things well, you treat what's in front of you, and you remember to charge for it. In other words, you be the best vet possible, and that's all you have to do.
Sure. Moving on to the question that I had about, I know you're an IT guru. You've written software, you've sold software, you've got this beautiful interface where you almost have you have artificial intelligence. It's not artificial, it's intelligence, it's business intelligence that's given to you by raw data. And the question is, what are you going to do with it? So to know, is the accountant running the business, or you're a vet and an accountant, so you're aware of the profit centers. Is it a fair or an unfair statement to say that accountants that deal within the vet profession also need to be aware of the very specific profit centers, or is that the veterinary business owner's responsibility?
So one of the things that I'm very passionate about, and this is actually quite controversial, but I'm quite happy to say it. I believe the people best placed to run the veterinary profession are veterinarians, which is contrary to what other people believe. The general talk track is veterinarians make crap business owners, and the veterinary industry should be run by someone else. I actually don't believe that at all. I think, as I've said in a lot of this discussion, the ethical component in the veterinary industry is very, very important. And I know for a fact that under large corporate management, the delivery of patient care in the veterinary industry is inferior. Whereas in even small veterinary practice, or even in larger, but in predominantly veterinary-owned veterinary businesses, so we're looking at maybe, 15 partners of like 15 vets, where the bulk of the decision making is within actually veterinary brains. I actually think deliver much better patient care. So should the accountant run the business? Absolutely not. The accountant is there to guide the clinical thinkers as to how to run their business financially. And given the right snap point or realization factor, they do realize that they have to make money out of it. But with that, they are prepared to balance a very, very important ethical decision. If you take the complete decision-making outside of the veterinarian's hands, then it becomes purely about profit and return to shareholders. And I don't believe that delivers the right outcome for patient care. So definitely not. And under no circumstances would I even believe in my role as an accountant now to and do we actually run veterinary practices? We have meetings with clients. We give them very, very clear guidelines as to what we think they should do. They select their strategies for the year. They say, these are the 4 things. Like, we show them all the data. We say, these are the ones where we think your practice is performing the worst. But you choose 4 key strategies for the year. They select their strategies for the year. And then we monitor the cause and effect of how well they're doing in those strategies. And then we'll guide them, and we'll say, well, have you had a team meeting about how to do standards of care around cytology? Do you have documentation in the practice? Are all your vets, treating ear cases consistently? And then we guide them into producing standards of care. But again, they would produce a standard of care in the practice with a team meeting with their vets and say, okay, let's see how we're going to treat ear disease. They have a team meeting, and all the vets in the practice agree as to how they're going to deal with that particular case. And I think it's very, very important that that decision making is left in the hands of veterinarians, not someone who's 25-year-old with an MBA telling clinicians, seasoned clinicians of 35 years of age, what treatments to use, what drugs to use, and which ones are the most cost effective to use. That's not where you make money in veterinary practice.
Well, thank you for being brave enough to say that as diplomatically as you could, because I just have a sense that there has to be some kind of ethical or moral backlash to this corporate chase of profit and arbitraging money, as opposed to looking after and really caring for the people within the profession. Because it is a stressful environment. It is a complex transaction, and my passion, like yours, I think, is to provide support. Whether it's the responsibility of the owner or the individual to take responsibility for personal self-care, and self-care could be many, many, many things. It's boundaries, it's how you show up, it creates the culture of the organization. How often do you do a set of books in a new organization and you realize, oops, there's some stuff here that don't sit on the financials, it doesn't sit on the balance sheet, there's some other issues here that need to be sorted for the business to reach its true potential?
Yeah, very often. Like, you'll see a set of financials and it only gives you 20% of the picture, which is why having the veterinary focus also helps. Because then looking at a practice's data, like, we look at their financial data, but then we also look at we basically look at how they invoice out of their practice management software. So for example, we might identify a practice that we know exactly based on the number of full-time vets and the number of patients that they're treating, what the volume of consultations in a veterinary practice should be. So, if you've got 1,000 active clients, for example, you should be doing roughly 900 consultations a year. If we see that practice has only got doing 600 consultations a year, we know their shortfall in primary consultations is about 30%. So we know in a big practice, this is like a $400,000 issue. So we then know that this is where we need to look, and invariably there will be inefficiencies around the workflow of the practice, consultation lengths that are too long, and possibly also a reception team that is actually deferring bookings or actually not booking things in. So a lot of it actually goes beyond, definitely what we do definitely goes beyond the financial statements. But it's, again, it's identifying the problem, showing them where it is, giving them ideas of how to fix it and how we've seen it work in other practices. And then it's up to the veterinary team and reception team. In this particular case, it will involve reception team to actually implement and put processes in the practice to make this work properly. And again, of course, it's a money-making exercise, but understand also that if your shortfall in consultations is 30%, there's 30% of your clients who are struggling to come in to have their pet seen when it's sick. And I will know quite well, it's really frustrating. Like, if you want to make a GP appointment, if you've got like a problem, like a sore knee or something, and you've got to wait a month to see that GP, it's very frustrating. And from a care perspective, it's not great. So availability of consultations, ethical and profitable. It's not a problem at all. But that's the kind of thing we'll delve into. And anything a vet can sell consults, repeat consults, vaccinations, cytology, volume of blood testing. We can see whether a practice is selling too little of that and diagnosing too little, or selling more than average. And we don't try and mark things to overservice. I don't think overservicing is good, but it very rarely happens in the veterinary industry. I can guarantee you that. Vets are generally too ethical to overservice anyway. It'd be a very rare case where we see overservicing, but generally underservicing because they're worried about the cost to the client is actually the most common problem in there. So we try and correct those issues on anything they sell. Even more controversial is actually when we go down to individual team performance. So we can actually do what we call business unit reporting. We can extract the financials and the sales performance of, say, it's a 6-vet practice. We can actually break it up as if it was 6 one-man practices, and we actually assess the profitability of each veterinary unit. This can be a little bit more confrontational when it comes to dealing with your team, because there is always strengths and weaknesses within a big group of vets. But again, from a mentorship obligation, if you have younger vets who are struggling to generate a profit, it comes back to that same thing. Like, if you're not generating a profit, you're never going to command the wage that's high enough to pay off your HECS debt and your student debts for a 6-year degree. So it's part of the mentorship process. We're very good at identifying exactly where that particular individual is weak. It might be billing, like their average invoice value may be low. Like classically, if you see someone who's doing a lot of tests and stuff, but their average invoice value is like, you know that they're discounting the invoices, and you can find it quite easily. So you've got to just train the person to and try and stop that behavior and have that conversation with them. So definitely 20% is on the financial stuff, and probably 70, 80% of it is actually on looking at that other stuff that's actually done within the business. Yeah.
That's for you to say those figures is astounding and probably spot on. Even though you've got that artificial intelligence, not even artificial, you have it.
There is artificial intelligence in the business. Chris Newton said it again. I'm the artificial intelligence because Anne thinks it and I say it. So basically, I'm just a puppet.
Oh, wow. So you have your answer effectively for your students.
Yeah, so just the delivery to students, you have to do it in a much more gentle manner. But
Yeah.
but certainly going forwards, the only way we can see the wages, like for you to command a wage high enough to pay off your student loans and to actually have the lifestyle of an equal professional, like say an accountant or a lawyer, you actually have to be very productive. So productivity-based wages are going to, I think, be more common. We're certainly encouraging them. And by that, I mean, you can see how much revenue a said individual generates, and you can pretty much reverse engineer what sort of wage they can earn. And based on this analysis,
multiple factor comes in, does it?
Yeah, actually, we actually disagree with the multiple factor because it actually doesn't work. We've actually done a webinar on that. The multiple only works if someone's average. So in other words, you should be doing, if you multiply your wage by 4 or 5, that's the amount of sales you should be producing. That only works in the mid-range of vets, and actually squashes, like it overpays poor performers and underpays significant performers. You can actually have someone on a 3 times multiple and actually generating a high profit for the practice. And there's a whole reason why that happens. But we have seen now that we're doing it to this degree is people that are 2 years out of university that can actually command a wage of over $160,000 a year, and people that have been 10 years out who actually cannot command a wage of over $100,000 a year. So there's no real reference to, once you, like the first 18 months to 2 years as a new vet is always a little bit shaky. It's always going to be, you need the mentorship to actually work in the business. But beyond that, if you find your feet, and this is kind of the conversation I have to have with students is find a practice where mentorship is good and where you can learn how to consult really efficiently, do the basic surgical procedures well, and be comfortable in the consult room and be happy charging for everything. Because then you'll be able to command a much higher wage and you'll actually have a career for yourself if you can get that part of it right. If you get it wrong and you become this person who's been working for 10 years and bills really, really badly, you're really not going to go forwards with a good career. So that's kind of the way we're looking at it, and it's very, very there's a very, very predictable way of looking at that. And I'm really not into this like oh, someone's been 2 years out. We're not an institution. Because you've been out for 2 years, you can only have a wage of $100,000. I don't care. Like if you're that productive, that good in the consult room, that good at making recommendations, booking in dentals, doing blood tests, that you're generating heaps of money for the business, you get the wage you deserve. I don't care if you're 1 year out, 2 years out, 3 years out, or 10 years out. Your wage needs to be related to your productivity.
I love that. And with all the beautiful software software that there is now and integration with accounting systems, and there are systems coming out of people's ears, marketing systems, Vetstoria, there's all the different software programs. How you're pretty confident that to add another piece of software, proper diagnostics, to pull that out and feed the AI back to the owner or the practice manager is still unleashing the true potential.
Definitely, yeah. So we can, like, when we extract the data, we're actually quite fussy about the data we extract and we clean it, because obviously it's different in every practice management software. But the advantage we've got is we also cross-match it with the financial data, which is what no one else can really do. So like when we actually connect a new software system to Profit Diagnostics, we already have access to that customer's accounting data. And the general tests we do is we actually match that the invoicing volume that they're doing, that we're extracting from their system actually matches what they're banking. So we know that we're pulling the right invoices and we're not pulling in estimates and things like that. So we actually have a cross check on that. That's where I think we've managed to get away with having much more better accuracy, for example.
Sure.
So we're very confident, yeah, we can do it. And actually, what we've started doing very, very recently in the last 3 or 4 months, because of the COVID bubble problem and the kind of boom and bust kind of trend now where people are starting to come back to the vet less, is because we have the data, we weren't going to go down this route, but there was such a high demand of it, we're actually doing marketing automations also. So our artificial intelligence can actually bring out patients that have fallen off the wagon, in other words, that were examined a year ago but haven't come in for an examination this year. Patients who are still engaged with the practice but for some reason have missed their vaccinations because the vaccination reminders have misfired, and then automatically send these pet owners text messages. So we're going to start doing what we call patient and client reactivation programs for clients also, which is actually not an accounting function at all, it's a marketing function, but because the demand was high and we have nice clean data to do it with, we're going to start, well, we've started doing that for a number of practices now.
So, there's obviously a balance between creating a very efficient system, making sure that all that works, and then having the resources to serve that. And then there's another kind of level where you're still stimulating the person academically, because the tendency for a professional should be a sovereign individual and make independent decisions, you feel like you're being trapped into a system, as opposed to, I'm still unique, I can still make my own choices, I can still grow, I can still be independent. How do you balance that?
Again, that's why we look at, like, when we look at and putting in a practice is lacking in standards of care, and like we can detect this inconsistency in treatment regimes across 6 vets. It's not for us to say you will treat your patients like this, you will treat an arthritis case like this, you will treat a skin case like this, you will treat an ear case like that. It's about, okay, get all your vets together, buy in some pizzas, have a 1-hour team meeting and say, listen, we have to formalize our standards of care for otitis externa, because what's happening is we're a big practice. Client A comes to see me this week. I tell them, in 2 weeks' time, I want to recheck this ear. I'm going to do a repeat ear swab, and I'm going to look at it under the microscope again. Client comes back, sees a different vet, and that vet doesn't do it. It just looks bad. The client loses faith in the practice. So having a consistent way of treating as veterinarians that we all agree on as veterinarians is important in this practice. So we understand there's multiple ways to deal with this case, but let's keep it consistent to some extent so that when clients see different vets, they get delivered the same advice. That's important. So we wouldn't prescribe to practice how to do it. We would say put in a standard of care that all your vets agree on. And that actually works really well. Actually, we get really little pushback, and younger vets love standards of care, and they love the consistency delivered across multiple vets. It's great for the team, and it's great for the pet's care also. It's actually quite commonly done, like certain human hospitals will do the same thing. They'll say in this hospital we'll have a standard of care around this very common condition, so that, like, if this guy's on holiday, then the next guy picks up his case, it at least gets treated in the same way, and there's consistency in treatment delivered. So I think consistency in treatment delivered is actually very different to being prescriptive and saying you will treat something like that. We're using the cheapest drug possible. That's a decision for the vets to make. If they sit down and say, oh, this generic drug we find works just as well as the original, and they agree as a team, then that's fine. If they want to use a more expensive drug, I really don't think it's a problem. So, yeah.
Sure. So looking, had you stayed in practice and not become an accountant, what advice would you give to a young veterinarian going through this journey of the next 10 to 15 years? What skill set would you look at to make yourself more resilient, happier, work-life balance? I know it's a big question.
Yeah.
But right now, we know the profession's re-looking at the model, whatever the model is, with your deep insight into having been a vet, having looked at 300 practices, knowing that there's huge potential in there, which is being exploited by others, but technically should be, in your opinion, held because of this beautiful balance between ethics and money. What areas? I mean, if you just list 2, 3, 4 areas that a vet could work in to upgrade themselves as to become, to be, to do, to have, and to be able to still give, because we all have that giving component. And I know you've been active with B1G1, which is a whole nother discussion, but instilling that culture of caring for each other, still being able to give to others and contribute, but keeping your boundaries in place so you don't burn out. It's a complex question, but
it's a very complex question. So, like, one of the things now, like, and the most powerful instrument is the retroscope, right?
The retroscope. Yes.
Okay. No. So
I'm asking you, look into your retroscope.
I'm looking into my retroscope now, and I'm thinking, like, what was really different about veterinary practice when I was a young graduate to what's different in veterinary practice now? And I'm definitely not a millennial basher. I think the breaking of confidence in younger graduates in any profession has actually been social media. That's what definitely wasn't there when I was a new graduate, and is definitely there now to new graduates. So, like, let's face it, as vets, we've all screwed up. Like, when we were first out in practice, we did some amazing stuff because we were brave and we were right there at the worst part of the Kruger-Dunning curve. You know, we were overconfident and underskilled, and these cases would come in that, like, had absolutely no hope in hell, and you would just do it, right? Because they couldn't afford referral. You wanted to save the animal, and, like, you'd do some really well, like a crazy exploratory laparotomy, and some you'd screw up. Like, it's inevitable that it's going to happen, and that's how you learn. And we could learn like that. The new guys can't, because what happens then is you not only get slammed by the pet owner, but it gets put up there for the entire world to see forever.
Yeah.
Okay. And that, to me, has been the biggest breaker of young vets. That would be the biggest confidence breaker to any young vet. So my first point would be, go to a practice where you think the mentorship's good. Doesn't have to be a good practice, but just has to be a place where the people who own the practice understand you're a new graduate, are happy to mentor you, and ignore social media as much as you can, because you're going to stuff up, you know. And the really good mentors and the really good business owners, and we had these meetings, they say, look, this new grad, he made a bit of a mistake. It wasn't a bad one, made a mistake, got slammed on social media, but I'm not going to pull them up for it. I don't think they did anything wrong. And I've sat down with them and said, like, carry on doing what you're doing. You know, you can't let social media drive your decisions, and as a business owner, nor should you let it drive the way you mentor your younger team. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say to someone coming into practice is become comfortable with billing. Everything around life revolves around economics. There's nothing you can do about it. If you're going to make a career for yourself, first of all, make yourself comfortable with being able to charge what you're worth. As a veterinary surgeon, 5.5-year degree, you're actually worth a lot of money. So you have to become confident with that. You don't have to be the world's best surgeon. The new graduates I was speaking about that are huge revenue earners actually been fantastic and efficient in the consult room. So in your first 12 to 18 months of your career, focus on your consulting room technique. Focus on that, like, 20-minute consult thing like that Alison Lambert does, so that you can do your notes and all that stuff in that 20-minute consult. Because unfortunately, the economics of things dictates that the 20-minute consult is probably the optimum amount of time for a veterinary practice in Australia. So make yourself efficient in the consult room. It's a place where you make the least dangerous mistakes and get the best bang for your buck and get quick results. Then once you've got good at that, then you can start upskilling yourself in surgery and start doing more surgical procedures. But if you're an efficient vet in the consult room and you never want the stress of surgery, You never have to go to the operating theatre. If you want to go to the operating theatre, you can, but you can generate plenty for a veterinary practice and even own your own practice by just being really, really good in the consult room. So that's the next bit of advice I've got. The last bit of advice I would say to a veterinary surgeon is don't close your mind off to ownership in a veterinary practice. We now are seeing a number of practices where the large practices where they're introducing young vets as partners as opposed to selling out to corporate veterinary practices. This is the way the accounting profession and the legal profession went 30 years ago, and they formed big practices that were owned by the profession. And we see this as a great way forwards for younger graduates. By taking the easy route and closing yourself off to business ownership, and ultimately, if things carry on going the way they are and working for a corporate veterinary practice, ultimately what will happen is you'll be 35 years old, there'll be a 25-year-old with an MBA telling you how to treat your patients. Not the model we want for the veterinary industry. So don't close yourself off to business ownership. It's a very, very profitable business, and you can do well out of it and do the most good for animal health by actually staying there and sitting it out. That would be my advice to someone new.
Thank you. That's just amazing. So look for good mentors, ignore social media, learn some billing, become really good in a consulting room. If you want to, learn some surgery, and don't discount becoming a partner.
Yeah, exactly.
That is amazing. Paolo, thank you so much. I didn't know where it was going to go, but
that's why I like to do these things. So no scripted answers. Like I said, it's just a chat, right? And then Anna listened to it and say, "Can't believe you said that."
You know what? I think that's the vulnerability and the courage that it takes to create a new model. So thank you so much. I've always respected you and Anne as veterinary influencers. You still are. So before you bugger off to the Caribbean with all your money, I hope you stick around.
Incidentally, we have no intention of doing that. So likewise, like I've said, we're actually going to introduce young accountants into our business as partners.
Oh, wow.
And we've actually currently upskilled a non-veterinarian to do the nitty-gritty of all the veterinary business valuation. So we've actually taken an accountant and trained them. So we're actually trying to make our skills, expand our skills, because that way we, just like I've been saying, like the concept is the same, is we can deliver more consistent and accurate advice to veterinary practice. There's only so much two people can do. There's only ever going to be so many people in the world with a veterinary and accounting degree. So we're busy upskilling some of our team to the knowledge we've got, and not going to have no intention of going hiding in the Caribbean, not for a long time anyway.
I know you love paddling. I know you love rescuing dogs and dancing with them. Thank heavens we still have you. Paolo, thank you so much. This could be broken up into a million sound bites. There's so much value in here, and
Oh, fantastic, Larry. It's been good to catch up with you again, and good to see you again, like on Zoom. Like I thought, what's Larry going to look like now? I haven't seen him for a couple of days. You look well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you too.
I would swear you actually look younger.
You're serious? No, you're just playing smoke up my backside. All right. We will chat again. Thank you so much.
Yes, Larry. Good to catch up with you.
Much love to Anne, and we will be talking again. I have
no doubt. We'll reconnect. Are you going to go to the AVA in Adelaide, the conference there?